Hey guys, Kid Aikino here. Just gonna do a quick little video that was requested by somebody on Twitter, just covering the Arrow Gamera box set and what I think of that. I initially wasn't really planning on doing a video about this for a couple of reasons. One just being that there's not nearly, it seems paradoxical, but I don't think there's quite as much to say about it in certain respects as with the Criterion Godzilla set. But for another thing, at the time the Arrow box dropped, I was I was in the middle of moving and not really in a position to be making videos, and I knew by the time I would be, it would have been out already, and people would have had time to have a look at it and discuss it and pretty much know what was up with it. But someone asked me to do it anyway, so here I am. First things first, just for a little context, I guess why, maybe at least this person is curious to hear my opinion is just because of my video on this absolute unit here. Honestly, I probably should have still just done a video about the Arrow box anyway, just because my video on this thing is by far the most successful video on my channel, just by like an enormous margin. Like, I think it's up in like the 13 to 15,000 view range, which is the most any of my videos have gotten so far. I don't think any of my other ones have even cracked like 5,000 views, so really I should have just done the Gamera set, just as a matter of principle, just for the views, if I knew what was good for me. But I remember before the Arrow box set was announced, I was kind of trying to temper my expectations a little bit, just because I think we'd all kind of gotten the impression from previous releases of these films that Kadokawa was not quite as restrictive a licensor as Toho, just in terms of the things that they had allowed to be included on past releases. But I didn't want to get my hopes up too high, because I'll be totally honest, in the couple of years between the Godzilla films showing up on Stars with the Criterion artwork and the eventual release of this thing, in that middle period I had allowed my hopes to get quite high, which set me up for some serious disappointment when we found out what we were in for with this thing, because it was really kind of hobbled by the licensor's restrictions. I don't know if Criterion would have necessarily bankrolled like brand spanking new restorations for every single one of these films. I don't know if that would have been entirely feasible for them, though as I understand it, this was a pretty successful release for them in terms of sales. So who knows really, but they might have been limited to Toho's existing transfers anyway. But they might have also been able to include some other versions of the films beyond like some but not all of Toho's export dubs and exactly 2 US versions. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear that that's all pretty much on Toho, although there is one thing that's pretty odd that I didn't pick up on when I was making my last video about this thing. But the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla, which sits on disc number 8, this supplements disc here, not only is it not even the most recent transfer of that version of the film that's out there, but it's also hard subbed, which I didn't even realize at the time that I was making the video, and I didn't spot it when I was skimming through the discs having a look at everything, and I think I saw somebody mention it before I confirmed it for myself, and I was like, what? No, that can't be right. It's probably just a forced subtitle track, just because people had mistaken how the subtitles were set up on Kraken Releasing's Return of Godzilla disc. They had mistaken that for hard subs, which they weren't. They were just forced. You couldn't turn them off from your Blu-ray player. But then somebody asked me to rip the Criterion subtitles for them, and when I went to do it, I saw that there were no actual subtitle tracks on that title on the disc when I opened it up in Make MKV. And yeah, sure enough, they're just burned into the picture, which is incredibly rare nowadays, for one thing. Like, I pretty much everyone knows you don't do that generally, but it's kind of it's really just kind of shocking coming from Criterion, which I don't know if that was down to a lack of time or restrictions from Toho. I mean, again, restrictions from Toho seem probable, but that's like a weird stipulation for them to have. Like, that's the kind of shit I don't think they've pulled since, like, 1999 with ADV's Destroy All Monsters disc. Like, that's just some appalling nerfing of this fucking release right there, which, you know, I assume was Toho's fault. Probably is. But yeah, I was trying to kind of temper my expectations for the Arrow Gamera set, just because we'd also had a couple of other sort of similar releases from Criterion in the meantime, just to kind of use as points of reference of sort of mass market East Asian genre films. And those were not nearly as restricted as the Godzilla set was by the licensor. In both cases, I'm talking about Fortune Star. But what I'm getting at, basically, is that we might not have gotten absolutely perfect inclusion of every single alternate version we could want in the Godzilla set. Just for instance, you take their Bruce Lee box set. You know, it's obviously it's a lot better. They've been allowed to do considerably more extensive color correction to the licensor's transfers. Fortune Star's 4K transfers of a lot of their movies, they're done by some lab in Europe, I forget the name, but they have some kind of weird color grading going on. It's not exactly like teal and orange. It's not exactly like the Toho slop jobs, but you can see comparisons online. For instance, I think the same transfers were used more or less as is by Shout Factory on their releases. So you can see the difference there. But Criterion was allowed to color correct those a lot better than Toho apparently let them do with Godzilla. But, you know, there's also... And, you know, they have included the original English dubs for The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and The Way of the Dragon. But, well, I say original. We're gonna split some hairs about that real quick. Basically, they've done a good job including a bunch of these dubs, including some alternate mixes of them that were released in Japan, where they have the English dubbed soundtrack, but they keep all of Bruce's key eyes and his little animal yelps and everything. They keep the original Mandarin ADR for those for the fight scenes, basically, but the English dialogue, and so often you'll have those alongside the straight dub tracks. However, they are missing an entire English dub for The Big Boss. I think it's you know, it's on the Wikipedia page, but I don't know how many people actually know about this. I didn't know about it myself because, you know, this set was basically my introduction to these movies, except for Fist of Fury. But there was first one English dub that was done in Hong Kong with the anonymous voice actor who also voices Gengo in Godzilla vs. Gigan. There's like a whole little circle of fans who've been digging up info on these Hong Kong dubs and these voice actors, but this guy still hasn't been identified. But he dubs Bruce in the original Big Boss dub. But the U.S. distributor National General, who, fun fact, also released Latitude Zero in the U.S., they apparently weren't satisfied with that dub, which is weird to me because it doesn't, from what I've sampled of it, it doesn't strike me as markedly worse than any of the other dubs by the same loose circle of Hong Kong talent, or for that matter, the Fist of Fury dub, which they apparently had no issue with. But yeah, apparently they weren't satisfied with that, so they commissioned a new dub. And I'm not sure who did that or where it was done. It might have been another Hong Kong thing with just a different cast and some different writing, which is weird to me because there's some writing and some line deliveries in the second dub that I consider like they seem pretty clearly worse in my opinion, but go figure. But in any case, that second dub has been the one that's basically stuck around, that was released in the US, that's been released kind of worldwide since, and has become kind of the official English version of the Big Boss. And it's billed on the Criterion box here as the original English dubbed soundtrack, which original must be playing in some technicalities there, because it was not the first dub. And like that first dub is out there, like it's not lost. Like the whole thing's on Dailymotion, courtesy of Space Hunter M. You can go and check it out if you like. But yeah, that wasn't included, and maybe that was down to the licensor's restrictions. But considering the sheer amount of like alternate credits from different releases and things like that, and like the wild, like there's a bunch of Bruceploitation trailers on that box. Like there's all kinds of stuff that like you would think this alternate dub wouldn't be a big issue for the licensor, but for whatever reason it didn't make it onto that box. So as good a package as that is, it's not really perfect either, for one thing. And then looking at another release kind of in the same vein, Criterion's release of Police Story 1 and 2. This is a case with more sort of alternate versions, a little more maybe relevant to what was missing from the Godzilla set. But basically, when it comes to Police Story, the first one, what we have on the disc is the Hong Kong theatrical cut, and that's basically it. It does include the original English dub with the original, I think, Michael Lai soundtrack, but the extended Japanese cut of the film and the somewhat trimmed down export cut of the film, neither of those are there, and both were included in some capacity on the Eureka UK Blu-ray release. The Police Force home video version is only, I think, included on the Eureka release in SD, and I think even only on the Hong Kong Rescue bootleg in SD. So the only way to watch that export version as it was originally released into the world in HD is Space Hunter M's reconstruction, which is pretty excellent. I won't say where to hunt it down here, just so as not to draw undue attention, but yeah, I've watched it. It's good. That cut of the film's pretty good, but I'm getting sidetracked here. We're not even onto the fucking Gamera set yet. But anyway, and then Police Story 2 on this release, real quick. It does include the extended Japanese cut of that film, but by virtue of the fact that the licensor Fortune Star is basically treating that cut of the film as like the main official cut, and so it's the main version presented on that disc as well. They do include the Hong Kong theatrical version, courtesy of a 35 millimeter bilingual subtitled release print with Cantonese audio. But we also don't get the, again, shorter export cut of the film that was sent abroad and is apparently the only cut that the original dub track covered. The original dub for Police Story covered the entire Hong Kong theatrical version, and I believe was shortened down for the export version, but the original dub for Police Story 2 was apparently just done on the export version, and so there's not a version of that dub that covers the full length, I think, of even the Hong Kong version, let alone the Japanese version. So what we get instead is a later redub on the Criterion release for Police Story 2, and if you listen to both of those dubs kind of right next to each other, it is a pretty glaring difference in style. I do like the original Hong Kong dub of Police Story. I think it suits it reasonably well, and a similar dub for Police Story 2 would probably be a lot more enjoyable as well. I haven't yet checked that dub out myself, but yeah. But in any case, I say all that to basically make the point that basically even if Toho hadn't, put its foot down about Criterion doing much of anything other than just rubber stamping the stuff that Toho already had on hand, even if they hadn't been so restrictive, we might not have ended up with like the absolute dream set. And so I was trying to kind of curb my expectations and try to be realistic about what the Gamera set might end up with, but as it turns out, we ended up with basically the absolute best package here that anyone could have reasonably expected. Every single English dub that any of these films ever received is represented here in some way. Only the really significantly altered dubbed versions are presented in more or less their original form here, which would be Gamera the Invincible and War of the Monsters, the American International TV version of Gamera vs. Barugan, that cuts about like 10-12 minutes out of the film, which really helps the pacing in my opinion. But basically all the other dubs are here as well, conformed to the Japanese version, or in the case of Gamera vs. Virus, they've got 3 different cuts of that one just through seamless branching due to the varying length of the stock footage montage in various releases. You have your short Japanese theatrical version. You've got your incredibly overlong 20-minute stock footage flashback US cut on there, recreated in widescreen, of course. Same with War of the Monsters, hence not quite its original form. And then you've also got the Japanese home video cut of Virus, which is kind of a halfway compromise between those two earlier versions. And yeah, so a couple times it was necessary, I think, maybe just the once. But yeah, there's one point in Gamera versus Giron during the Space Gyao scene where they have to cut back to the Japanese audio and put some subtitles in there, just because that scene was cut from the American International TV Titan dub of the film. Just, I think, for the sheer pretty jarring violence of the scene. But yeah, all of the dubs are present, and all the American International dubs are taken from sources that were held in MGM's archives, the same archives from which they found the I think it was an interpositive for Yongari, which is the source for the current widescreen releases of that film. So all of that stuff sounds probably as good as it's ever going to on this set. And all the other dubs were taken from the best available materials, which in some cases were commercial VHS. Some of them were on Laserdisc, at least for the show-off films anyway. They all sound pretty damn good, except for Super Monster, which has always had the dub for that one has just always sounded fucking god-awful for whatever reason. And that's still the case here. They had a few different sources to draw on. I was actually contacted back in January by James Flower after I'd put together some custom MKVs of the 4K remasters of the Shusuke Kaneko Gamera trilogy with some alternate soundtracks and stuff, which I put together with the help of Space Hunter M. He got in touch and wanted to see if, maybe we had some leads on other sources just in case they should need them. But yeah, so basically for Super Monster, they had the dub that came from the MGM materials. They had copies of it taken from like television broadcast recordings and like VHS releases. They had pretty much every source out there, but it kind of just, as far as we can tell, inherently sounds like shit. There's just kind of nothing to be done for it, so it sounds like shit in the box too, but it's not their fault. And the multiple dubs and everything that carries over into the Heisei films as well. The first two Shusuke Kaneko Gamera films got multiple dubs. In the case of Guardian of the Universe, you've got the US ADV dub and the UK dub with the added techno music. Those are both in here. For Gamera 2, you've got the main ADV US English dub, and then you've got their, okay, now do a silly one, kind of comedic redneck dub, the Lake Texarkana dub. That's in here as well, which was interesting to see when I heard about it, just because when I was emailing with James Flower, he was saying he was kind of on the fence about including that and the comedic Gamera 3 commentary, just because he didn't find him very funny, which, in my opinion is fair. It's incredibly broad humor that's really just kind of the voice actors goofing around, and no offense to them, but it's not groundbreaking comedy. But it's still neat to see it included here, just for the sake of, completionism and putting together the definitive packages of these films. But then, Jesus Christ, there's so much to talk about with this set, actually. Not much to dive into in terms of history and explaining how it got this way, in terms of not quite apologetics, but, just having some explaining to do. But there is a lot to say about the stuff that's in here, just to explain how it came to be such a fucking quality release. God, I'm talking forever. I don't know how long my camera battery's gonna last. I'm gonna try to get through this quick. But basically, as for the transfers of the films themselves, they are working with the masters provided to them by Kadokawa for most of all of the main, Japanese versions of the films. Gamera the Invincible is a somewhat different story. So they have taken those masters and really pretty meticulously color corrected and kind of refined them. And they do inherit some of the inherent limitations of those transfers. Like, for instance, the original Gamera, that transfer, the Kadokawa transfer, has some appalling black crush, and there's really not much of anything you can do about that without drastically increasing the noise in the transfer. And so the transfer of it on this box more or less inherits that same amount of crush, but they've adjusted the contrast and everything so it looks a lot better. I think the native black levels of that transfer as it appeared on the Japanese Blu-rays and on the the Shout Factory DVDs and the Mill Creek Blu-rays, the native black levels were barely any darker, if at all, than like the Premiere Pro interface. Like, they were really, really weak. But Arrow did a nice job adjusting that, so you know, it kind of looks like a movie, you know. Like it actually looks somewhat appealing now. They've also deinterlaced all of the Showa Kadokawa transfers, so there is that. They are now presented in a, you know, progressive 24 frames per second. And yeah, and you know, it's not just the contrast and stuff either, but I've gone through and compared the other films, and they've done legitimate color correction to a bunch of these, removing some kind of weird tints that were on some of the transfers, and they look, you know, again, you know, some of the limitations are still inherently there, and there's not much you can really do about them, but it's really like night and day from the previous releases how they look. They look fantastic. Arrow did a great job with them. And that color correction isn't just limited to the Showa films either. The original color grading of the 4K remastered Shusuke Kaneko trilogy, that was skewed kind of teal and orange a little bit, or maybe a little bit green and orange, I don't know. I didn't think it really looked bad when I'd seen it. I thought it looked okay. I didn't hate to look at it. It was a damn sight better than the Mill Creek releases of the previous HD transfers of those particular films. But Arrow has color corrected those as well toward a more neutral look that's more in line with, you know, what the film would have looked like when it originally played in theaters, you know, kind of as it was shot. And they've done a pretty good job with that. And again, I've done screenshot comparisons on Twitter, and it does seem that they have actually gone and done them scene by scene. It wasn't just a blanket adjustment slapped onto the whole transfer and, you know, call it a day. They really went through and meticulously, you know, corrected the colors on these transfers to make them look as good as they possibly could, and they look pretty damn great. They've also done some adjustments to the Legend Films transfer of Gamera the Invincible, as well as reinstating some footage of a fighter pilot that was missing from that transfer for whatever reason. They reinserted that missing footage from the Kadokawa transfer, the Japanese version, and because the pilot is speaking English in those scenes, you do get the Japanese subtitles in the frame there. But honestly, it kind of, you know, that's a very small thing to sort of nitpick about. It, you know, they've done a damn good job here. They really have. And that's not even touching on, like, the sheer wealth of information that was in this thing. Like, in the Godzilla set, we do have some liner notes by Steve Reifel and Ed Godzacheski, and, you know, these are guys who know their stuff. There's some good information in there. Not a lot that you probably haven't already read if you've read kind of a lot about these films. Like, there wasn't, I don't recall a whole lot in there that stood out as incredibly new to me. Nothing that revelatory per se, but, you know, it's good information to have in there if you want some background and context for the films. And, you know, I imagine it would be like just a fucking goldmine to like an absolute newcomer. And so that's pretty good. But what's in here is insane. Like, for one thing, you know, everything's in these big books. Let's have a look at this thing, shall we? We've got the discs are housed in this one big hardcover book here. I don't really know what's up with the edges of the pages, the foam core or whatever that the pages are made of being green like that. It doesn't look entirely intentional, like it matches with the rest of the package, but you know, again, very, very small thing. But, you know, you've got all your discs in here. They're in these little sleeves again, like they were in the Criterion release, which is not really ideal per se, but they have at least added a little cutout to get a grip on the edge of the disc, slip a thumbnail under there or something, which Criterion did not. So these are, I would say, easier to get out. But there's your first disc right there. or your first book rather. The second one is a collection of comic books. You've got Matt Frank's Kaneko trilogy, Dojinshi, The Last Hope. But then on top of that, you've also got a complete reprint of the Dark Horse Gamera comics that were released in the 90s. So that's another book full of great stuff. They don't have any of the manga published in Japan, except for The Last Hope, which I think was originally published in Japan in Japanese. I think, yeah, they don't have any of the old manga in there, but it's, what they have is fantastic, and adding much more would have only made this set even more just absurdly large. But then this last book here, it's a big old paperback basically, but it's got all these essays and all this background info on all the films. It's got information about the transfers. It's got an excellent guide for all the context for all the different English versions. Like, I think they say in there, it's like, a newcomer might be overwhelmed just by the sheer wealth of options here. And so here's a little history on all of those, and a little explanation of what they all are. And it's just fantastic. And there's other behind the scenes stuff. There's like some memoirs or diaries or something from Norman England, who saw a bunch of the production on the Kaneko trilogy, I believe, and also just a wealth of supplements on the discs. Like the Showa films are a little lighter on them than the later films, but you've got commentaries on every single film. You've got some nice little introductions by August Rigoni. You've got a lot of Japanese featurettes and things. The Gamera versus Virus, where the two kid lead characters are Boy Scouts. There's they included a little documentary short, apparently directed by Noriaki Yuasa, who directed most of the Showa Gamera films. They have this little documentary about an actual big international Boy Scout jamboree that he apparently directed. And they have, all these alternate English credits in there in, the best sources they could possibly get. So, like, so the stuff related to the, and my camera's finally died, but my phone's still rolling, so I guess I'll just lay in my thumbnail for this video there. But yeah, so there's just a huge wealth of material here, of extras and behind the scenes stuff, and even more so with the Kaneko films especially, and a good deal of stuff for Gamera the Brave too. But yeah, there's the alternate credits from the various English versions. With the AITV versions, those are taken from film material in MGM's vaults. And then with the Sandy Frank versions, for instance, that's taken from like VHS or Laserdisc, whatever they could get their hands on for that. And then that includes some stuff from the Kaneko films as well. They have for instance, the end credits from the UK version of Guardian of the Universe, where it lists off all of the techno tracks that were added to the soundtrack. But yeah, just an insane wealth of stuff here. The only things I can really nitpick about this, or the only real flaws, in my opinion, that I can point out, have to do with Gamera the Brave's English dub. Now, this has been kind of a cursed dub, which, considering it originates with Media Blasters, may not be that much of a surprise. But on Media Blasters Blu-ray, released in 2013, somehow they screwed up the music and effects track on that, so there's like two separate copies of the music and effects playing, separated by about 10 seconds. Like, it makes the English tracks on that disc completely unlistenable. It wasn't like that on the DVD that came out in like 2008. So I don't know what the hell happened there. But yeah, so there were some serious issues there. And unfortunately, on this release, which I was kind of looking forward to having like a more perfect version of that dub on Blu-ray, just because I think it is one of the better kaiju film dubs of recent years, certainly since the turn of the millennium. Like it's one of the best. But unfortunately, while there's nothing there's nothing as drastic as the Media Blasters Blu-ray here, thank God. It does sound like both the surround and stereo tracks are running about a quarter to a half a second ahead of the picture. Like they just seem slightly out of sync. Like not enough to make it unwatchable, but enough to be very obviously noticeable. And when I emailed James about it, because I figured I'd probably want to know about that if it had slipped by him. And what he said was that in the materials they got from Media Blasters for the dub, they didn't have the stems or anything. The original music, effects, and dialogue tracks all separate. They only had the finished mixes, so they couldn't fiddle with the sync themselves. But they said that basically all of those elements were slightly out of sync with each other in the mixes they got. So like the effects weren't quite in sync with the music, and neither of those were quite in sync with the dialogue. I actually haven't examined it quite that closely, but it looks as if everything is out of sync by a similar amount. Like I think the whole track is just shifted forward a little bit more than it should be. I don't know. Those sync issues might be in the mixes. I'm not necessarily doubting that. Like Media Blasters is, I think by now, pretty much universally acknowledged to be kind of a Mickey Mouse outfit. I could see them screwing that up somehow, but it doesn't. I don't think if those sync issues are in there that they necessarily account for what's going on this disc. It looks to me like at the very least, I haven't compared the sync on the music that closely, but it's definitely very easy to tell, to judge the sync with the music and the effects and the dialogue, and those seem to be running fast by similar amounts. So I think if you shifted the whole thing back a fraction of a second, you could have it, if not perfectly in sync, then certainly more acceptably so. James says that the people authoring the discs settled on what they thought was the best compromise. And maybe that would be the only course available to them if those tracks really are all out of sync with each other. But I'm not entirely sure that was implemented correctly on the final discs, is what I'm getting at. And basically what I was told over email was that he didn't think they were probably going to do a disc replacement program, although I've since seen somebody post on the Blu-ray.com boards about having emailed Arrow and basically getting the message back that they're looking into it and they're deciding whether to do a disc replacement program. So hopefully that'll be the case, or it'll at least be corrected on the standard editions of the discs that are eventually released. And that's another whole thing too. So part of my assumption with with not making a video like this was that everybody would be able to get this disc or this set, or at least a lot of people would be able to get this set. But apparently they wildly underestimated the demand for it, and sold out very, very quickly. These things were already being scalped weeks ago. Retailers are having to kind of announce that they're putting up their stock at a certain time if they get more, and then those sell out in like a matter of seconds. Like it's kind of nuts how scarce this release ended up being. And thank God I placed my pre-order on Amazon like as soon as it went up, pretty much, because I got mine, I think, on the release date. But yeah, so many people have been having so much trouble getting their hands on this thing, which is a shame. But at least we do have that kind of standard, less deluxe, not limited edition release to look forward to. Like, at least that's going to be a thing. And these discs, if not all the stuff in the books, are going to be more widely available. And I expect eventually the secondhand prices on the limited edition box are going to go down as well. So you'll probably be able to get your hands on that as well at a more reasonable price that's not like $400 fucking dollars. But yeah, all in all, this is a really excellent release all around. And even like, you know, there are a few alternate versions on here in addition to the main 12 on the discs, and so that comes out to about 14 films, just shy of the 15 from the Criterion set, across a similar number of discs. There are 8 discs in both the Criterion set and the Arrow set. The Arrow set doesn't have a whole disc dedicated just to supplements. The supplements are distributed across the discs, grouped with the films that they're relevant to. So that helps a little bit, I think, with the compression and everything. But that's still, you know, a lot of material put on these discs, but they've authored them like superbly. And I think James Flower mentioned this in an interview or something, that they had some of the best people in the business in terms of compression and disc authoring working on this release. And it shows. Like, I think I've at least sampled all of the movies on this set. I haven't watched them all. I've been refraining from watching things ahead of time before I reach them in the binge, so I haven't watched all of these all the way through yet. But I have yet to notice, despite the sheer amount of stuff on these discs, any compression-related anomalies on these things. They've really managed to get the file size down enough to fit everything on these discs without visibly sacrificing pretty much any quality. Like, all of this stuff looks really damn good, even on the Showa discs, which are, you know, 2 or 3 features plus extras to a disc. Like, it's just fucking remarkable. Like, this set, it really is, like, probably the closest to the absolute pedantic nerd's wet dream of a set that, you know, we were ever likely to get in real life. Yeah, it's just magnificent. And I would tell everybody to go out and get it if they can, but they kind of can't right now due to the miscalculation of the demand there. But yeah, definitely, once the standard version of these discs, I don't know if it's going to be in a box, I don't know if each disc is going to be available kind of a la carte, but you know, whenever those standard releases come out, I cannot recommend these discs enough. Like, absolutely go and get them if you like these movies at all. They blow pretty much any previous editions out of the water. Pretty much, hell, no. They do kind of put everything else to shame, and they really strike quite a glaring contrast with the Godzilla box. Like, it was a phenomenon that was going on for a while with the films, but now also with the home video releases for like a quarter century now. The Gamera series has been lagging slightly behind Godzilla in terms of timing, but absolutely beating it on quality over quantity. Arrow has knocked it out of the park, plain and simple. And you know, Kadokawa was cool enough to let him do it, while, you know, Toho continues to just accumulate more L's than the CTA. But anyway, so yeah, shit. Thanks for watching. If you've gotten through my very unfocused, unscripted rambling here, if you've managed to watch the whole video, thank you so much. Huge thanks to my patrons, especially Exploder Button, John Paneer, and Ryan Clark. And thanks again to everybody for bearing with me through my hiatus while I was moving. If you want to become a patron, the link's down in the description, and right now there is an exclusive video essay on there that I did before the last Kaiju Binge episode. So if you want to see that, go ahead and sign up there. But yeah, thank you guys very much, and I'll see you next time.